Another state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.
Welcome to the Black Miss Podcast. Welcome to the Black Miss Podcast. Our gracious host is not here today, so y'all are blessed, not stuck with just the three of us. This is Cameron here with Ryan and Terrell, and today our myth is that Atlanta is the Black Mecca.
Child.
Yeah. Before we even dive in, Ryan, like, when you heard this shit, what popped in your head?
Look, man, this takes me back because, unfortunately, I used to
talk to him, brother.
I mean, I used to look up to Atlanta as a culture, the artist. I mean, as a teenager going into my 20s, I was just sold on the idea of it being the Black Mecca. I used to call it myself the Black Paradise. I used to talk to my friends about it's the closest thing to a Black heaven here on earth. I dreamed about moving there, starting a successful business, getting married, having kids, the whole Black bourgeoisie American dream. However,
I should have a picket fence and shit.
Black picket fence
next to a chicken shop.
Yeah, take my kids to church every Sunday. My wife wearing one of those big hats, all that shit.
You're gonna have a fedora with a little feather.
A little feather coming out.
You're gonna be wearing your lemon pepper steppers.
The Annihilator Gators. But
Gators.
I wholeheartedly believed in the idea of the Black Mecca. Now, unfortunately, as I get older and prepare for this episode, I start to realize that it's actually not the Black Mecca or a Black heaven or Black paradise, whatever you want to call it, Black Hollywood. There's a lot of names that Atlanta goes by these days. It's actually for a lot of Black people there, it's a hell for poor and working class Blacks. And you'll find out in this episode that Black leadership, Black faces in high places do not equal material gains for Black poor and working class.
And you didn't know that already, because I would hope that if you are listening to this and you've listened to us, that you know that we don't fuck with them.
Hey, bro, say that shit again.
Terrell hates Atlanta, y'all. I just wanted y'all to know that.
No, I don't hate Atlanta. So when I had family members that were moving to Atlanta, and when I was getting older, like I would visit Atlanta and I would go to Atlanta. I would have fun. I loved it for the trap music because, hey, I'm a nigga. It is what it is. I love trap music. I love all the shit, all the entertainment shit of it. But my whole reason for not wanting to move there when I got older, like me and my wife are planning to move back to the South, and I just don't want to be in Atlanta. One, because it didn't seem genuine to me. I was like, I get it. Trap music there, entertainment wise, I can live my best life in Atlanta, entertainment wise. But I also understood that I'm going to be one of those people that are in the low middle class, poor, like low middle class to poor section. And it's not great for them. And to be I'm sorry, but we're getting on topic here. To be considered the Black Mecca, I'm sorry, but you have to address every Black class level.
Every Black person, exactly.
Black person. And I saw like my cousins go through some struggles and stuff where they were living in unsavory neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods, the reason they're unsavory is because nobody gives a fuck about them. Like they're written off.
I think it's fucking sacrilegious to be calling anything a Black Mecca to begin with, first of all. Like, Mecca is an Islamic holy city. It is the birthplace of an entire religion in the Prophet Muhammad. Like, there is no space that we are going to have that in this trash ass blood-stained country that could ever be considered holy. It's just that's that. It's always problematic when we place these pedestals for any space, any person, any body, and like create this idealistic nature. I personally have never really liked Atlanta, and maybe that's just because I'm from LA. I already was fine with where I was from, and the only place I wanted to go outside of that was New York.
And also, to everyone's point, Harlem used to be considered the Black Mecca, but for different reasons. For Black Mecca in Atlanta is more of like Black business. They put that on the pedestal, the Black dollar,
Yeah. And when you say
how much
Harlem,
wealth you can accumulate. With Harlem, it was more so the arts, the culture, the politics. It was
but even
something.
when you say Harlem, and I'm sorry to interrupt, when you say Harlem, people in Harlem, whether they were upper middle class, lower class, whatever, they understood the politics. They were educated, and the education like wasn't hid from them. And I'm not saying it's hid from them in Atlanta, but like I'm not gonna act like I'm gonna go to South Fulton or some shit like that and run into anybody that's just politically educated about what's going on in their city. They may say some shit is fucked up. We don't like this. We don't like that. I get that part of it, but compared to Harlem, where they can break down, y'all
Renaissance.
Got it. Yeah, y'all got it.
Yeah, I think it's important to note though, right? When we're looking at these spaces and we're talking about anything as a reflection of like the perfect space for Black people, you really have to ask like, for whom? There is no, like, all Black people do not live in Atlanta, do not want to be in Atlanta, do not function in the same capacities, do not have the same ambitions or goals. And so in that sense in itself, like there can never be a one space that would be considered a Black Mecca. And when we look at not just like, yes, can we talk about like the fact that there's successful people that have come up and through Atlanta? Yay, we can. Can we talk about the amount of education that takes place? Yes, we can. But when we also look at the struggles of working class people, when we look at the struggles of children there, when we look at the struggles of women, of the disabled, of the elderly, of the whole, when we look at the whole picture of Black people, like we can't dismiss that and just be like, oh, but that's where hip hop is thriving in the South. And, you know, when you go to Atlanta, everybody got money, because that's just not a realistic thing. That's a facade that's being put on. And without like a critical analysis of that, that's how we end up in spaces where Atlanta is being overrun by fraudulent ass bourgeoisie people. And now we got fucking Cop City. Like,
and even if that would be covered. Even if all you said was a real thing, is that really what we want to classify as our like, we're the entertainment capital? Yeah, like we're the entertainment capital. You come here to have a good time. Like I'm sorry, I got Vegas for that. So yeah, I'm cool. Like
also to reduce Black culture to just mere entertainment. See, that's in the white. That's just something that's constrained in the white gaze, right? That we can
capitalistic mindset of like,
exactly.
Oh, because you see people there with money, because there's a bunch of Black business, because there's Black politicians, that means that Black people are doing phenomenal. But that's not that's not true. And that is not the level of what people should strive to.
So I think it would be good to go ahead to go into the origins of Black Mecca, how it became this idealized place for Black people. So since the Emancipation Proclamation, Atlanta, Georgia has boasted a history of Black people thriving through the establishment of Black-owned businesses and Black education, yet many were excluded from Atlanta's rising Black bourgeoisie. Atlanta's moniker, the Black Mecca, Atlanta's moniker as the Black Mecca is linked to the course of the American Civil War, where General William Tecumseh Sherman burned the city down and marched to the sea. Newly freed Blacks followed him on his way and found refuge in Atlanta, thanks to the presence of Union troops and the 14th Amendment. So on December 22nd, Henry Grady, who is a managing editor of the Atlanta Constitution, which is a newspaper down there, and also one of the members of Atlanta's ring of Democratic leaders, spoke before a New England society in New York. His speech detailed the coming of the New South. in which he advocated for industrial development as a solution to post-war South's economic and social troubles. In particular, Grady promoted this economic development potential of Atlanta. So, some background on Henry Grady. He was also a journalist and a staunch white supremacist. He always, exactly, he would publish pieces in his paper making fun of lynchings. It's also one of the first examples of someone selling Atlanta as a potential for big business and industry. This was basically a clever piece of marketing, was a success, and brought people from the North, investors, bought into this idea of the New South. And the New South was a marketing ploy similar to the Black Mecca to attract Northern investors that claim race relations have improved since the end of slavery, and Black people are finally found equal footing with white people. And from this, we have a Black leader who was an advocate for the New South, Booker T. Washington, who wanted Southern economic regeneration, sectional reconciliation, and racial harmony, and believed in the gospel of good old hard work. In several articles, Grady reported that Blacks experienced fair treatment throughout the South in general, and in Georgia in particular.
Can we pause on that part?
Go ahead.
Fair treatment in the South means
fair treatment in the South doesn't exist.
Exactly, but
especially not during this time.
When it comes to business, it's almost like a 360, like a 360 contract that artists would sign. And hey, look, you should be happy. You're making 10, 20 cents on the dollar of what you could be making you should be happy. We got to do this. We got to pay this. It's almost when they say that, like, it's a fair deal for Black people, I always jump back to like that 360 deal and rappers contracts, because
so cold. The 360 deals be taking you out. I think it's important. Like, Grady was a businessman. So if he had to beg, borrow, lie, or steal to get folks to do what he needed to do, he was going to do that. And that's really what all this was. Like, this was just a propaganda campaign to get wealthy folks from the North to invest. Like, it makes sense that for other Black people, they would have wanted this to take place, because not everybody was blessed enough to, or had the means to get out of the South and want to go North, or felt that they can do it. And some people, we know, got real tea coming back down that the North wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, and some people didn't want to leave. And so in some capacities, like, I could understand why Black folks would have wanted to see the South sort of come back to life. But of course, where there might be good intent from our folks and bad, because businessmen are liars and cheats too, you also got white people who want to make $1, and they didn't want to see us do anything. And we saw that for a long time. Like, it wasn't like they got all this money coming down early on, anything happened. We saw that he lied and wrote like Blacks in Atlanta were flourishing because the community was doing so well. They were self-sufficient. And we've seen these type of messages being perpetuated over and over again.
No, and also in our past episodes, we've covered this ground, with especially with the Black Wall Street, this whole idea of, Blacks are flourishing. The Black bourgeoisie, or just even upper middle class people in general, they love to just water down and then just whitewash a lot of history, just to really sell you a narrative, and so it enriches them. And this is just a prime example of that. He wanted white investors to come in there so he can make a quick buck. Doesn't matter what the actual people they're suffering. Even white poor people. There's a portion of the book we're talking about white poor people were suffering as well, but they still bought into this idea of the New South.
There wasn't, but the reality of it was, it wasn't that Black people were getting a lot of this investor money. Black people during this time did what Black people have always done, and that is pull together our resources, pull together our money, educate each other, come together, that at the time was what allowed for Black people in Atlanta in some capacities, because as we know, not everybody was afforded these things, but that's what allowed the foundation for Atlanta to come. Like, you know, we saw this in higher education. Like Atlanta University was founded in 1865. We got more that initially was in Augusta. It was the Augusta Black College, moved to Atlanta as the Atlanta Bible College at first. Then you got Clark in 1869, and then you have Spelman to come and Morris Brown, both founded in 1881. And so at that time, like no other force in the city had more political, social, cultural, and historical significance for Blacks on a scale that was taking place at this time. And that is something to applaud. That is something to see be cherished and honored. But like all good things, shit started going to shit. Not immediately, but over time, like where you have, because did every Black person get to go to college? No. There were still people who were working blue collar jobs and blue collar careers. And unfortunately, you know, we see what that Black people still, even with all of this, you think white people were over here just like, I'm gonna open all these doors for y'all. Y'all doing so well for yourselves. Let me go ahead and just let you in, so y'all can get rich and flourish beside us.
I'm sorry. You know how they say. You know how they say the devil. You know how they say the devil's in the details. The details is capitalism.
Sometimes we were bringing chairs to the table, and you know things were taking place. Like Black churches were producing some of the best leaders at that time that were incredibly remarkable. We saw that Blacks were elected to the Georgia General Assembly, and they helped write the Georgia post-Civil War Constitution of 1868. But this didn't even go well because it caused a lot of resentment between folks, because they found it difficult. They were like, okay, well, we got crumbs, but now what? Like now we need things to actually be a community we want to be, if we deserve, we've fought hard, we have done enough, and we are whole people who deserve to be a part of every system that we have to pay in. The fuck I look like paying taxes and having to go to work for y'all people and still be cleaning houses, but still have no say-so in the world that I live in.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. You know, and with all our self-determination coming together and creating those spaces where we can educate ourselves, even, you know, a lot of those HBCUs that you mentioned were during Reconstruction, even after Reconstruction, you know, kudos to us for getting that together. But also some of the great Black minds that came out of Atlanta, you know, W. Du Bois, who taught at Atlanta University, who also called out a lot of the bullshit that was happening in Atlanta with a lot of the Black bourgeoisie, you know, of course, in the form of Booker T. Washington, Atlanta Compromise, telling all Black people to basically forget about worrying about civil rights, forget about worrying about your civil liberties, forget about all of that. Just worry about getting your paper, doing vocational training and all the other goods and all the other stuff. But he called them out, saying, you know, Black people have to be able to fight for their rights in order for us to even progress and climb the ladder or whatever, you even just to live. You have to have these basic freedoms. And then of course Booker T. Washington being, I have my own critiques of this person, even back then.
I was like, y'all might not know.
Even
Ryan
back then.
Atlanta. But he has a strong disdain. I won't call it a hatred, but a deep disdain.
Hey. I'm gonna tell you right now.
He was waiting for this myth specifically to be.
I'm gonna tell you right now, bro. Whatever only because let's just say, even though I know better, let's just say I don't know shit about Booker T. Washington. All I know is my elementary school, he was one of the Black people that they did bring up.
Exactly.
And me now as an adult knowing I should not trust that shit. Talk your shit, bro.
Well, I mean, Booker T. Washington, again, like through the Atlanta Compromise, you know, he was able to appeal to white wealth in the North, Rockefeller, industries like that, by basically kind of what I say, you don't telling black people don't worry about your civil rights, just get your money. He kind of was the prototype for this idea of the black dollar, the black, black business. That's kind of what all these people today base that on. A lot of his words. Now, Booker T. Washington also, I mean, he had a way of just quelling a lot of the radical sphere of black movements just through his work. And a lot of white people liked him. I mean, his whole work was the basis for the separate but equal legal language that resulted in the 1896 U.S. Supreme Court Plessy versus Ferguson decision. So yeah, I mean, fuck this guy.
I bet they did like him. Yeah,
I mean, and you have to have a dissenting voice. I mean, that's one of the reasons why with the Black Mist podcast, we are that, very much that. And shout out to all of Black Power Media. You have to have a dissenting voice when it comes to cut against the grain of all of this bullshit that's happening. Greed, capitalism, materialism, that's just taking a stronghold in the Black community, especially during that time because of Booker T. Washington and a lot of his work. But
and it's not even a notion of like needing a dissenting voice just for the sake. Like nobody likes somebody who just wants to, y'all don't hate people who play devil's advocate or just argue for sake, but you really need, when there's so much, I mean, and we can see this even back then, there were people who were misguided, misinformed, who were given platforms and were spreading information that was harmful to Black people, which is the whole basis of our pod, is to debunk the bullshit that is said about that way people can be able to better advocate, and not just for themselves, but for our communities, so we can actually do the work to get fruit. And I think it's important because back then, like, people did not know very much that was taking place all over with the way that we do. Like, there were no fucking phones, there was no internet. This was all working out. And so to be a Black person in power who had a voice, who was getting put in the paper, where people were being sent all over, being put in books, like, to have folks who were not taking that or did take it seriously, but were using that to misguide folks, it was really damaging. And thankfully, there were folks who were like W.D. Du Bois, whatever, however you choose to say it,
right,
was willing to do that, and willing to criticize it, and be able to call it out as like still subjugating Black people to being at the bottom, and still talk about that, like, we need more, like, our job isn't to emulate whiteness. We should not aim to also be fueled by greed, by capitalism, by materialism. It's not a notion of just some of us getting money, because he understood that will always come at the cost of just a couple of us and then the rest of us. And he wasn't a perfect person at all.
No, of course.
Valentin 10th concept,
highly flawed.
The respectable Negroes. But I think that collectively during this time, what we saw was a mass confusion in some capacities, in my opinion, about, like, how do we, now that we are here, now that we are not slaves, now that we are trying to figure out our lives, like, what do we do from here? And I think that's sometimes the problem, when we don't take into consideration the collective, right? And I mean, even when we move forward to like what we see today, as far as Atlanta and just Black leaders and people with platforms, is they're often operating off of their own thoughts and opinions and perspectives on what will work for Black people, versus the simplistic understanding of, why don't I go in my community, ask the people, and then collectively strive, which is what I think we saw coming out of this, where people were like, you don't speak for me. I agree with some of it, but actually you don't know what's going on. At this time was there were specific Black people being cherry picked by the white and placed in positions of power, which just in turn turned out to be this counterfeit level of Black leadership, because it was people who had assimilated. It was people who, fit the profile of what they wanted to be seen as the perfect Negro. And we'll let these kind of Negroes into society as a way to parade them around and be like, well, if you are this kind of nigga, you're fine. But if you are this kind of nigga, we have trees for you.
Exactly. And it kind of leads into, there is a term coined called the Atlanta style, where the elite Blacks become spokespersons and decision makers for the Black community as a whole, without any input from the Black community. And that becomes problematic as well.
Extremely problematic.
As Kim just kind of pointed out, you have to have engagement with the Black community, Black poor and working class community, not just the Black bourgeoisie, not just the Black middle class, because you need to understand the concerns. But if you start to ignore the concerns, you just open them up for them to be exploited and them to be manipulated and ignored. So when we get into the Atlanta style, you start to see there's definitely a contrast between Atlanta's elite and the Black poor and working class. A lot of the Black poor Atlantans were victims of inadequate housing. You see dirt, decay, overcrowding, poor playground facilities, streetlights are non-existent. You start to see garbage uncollected, sewers running open, rats, vermin, and just a lot of decrepit neighborhoods and decrepit housing when you're dealing with the Black poor in Atlanta. And it's disheartening to have Black leadership when you have Black people within your city that are suffering every day. So how can this be called the Black Mecca? How can you even claim that? So in an effort to bring the Milwaukee Braves franchise to Atlanta, Mayor Allen and the Chamber of Commerce built a stadium on the edge of Summerhill in the Washington Rawson neighborhood. Originally, it was ran by wealthy whites, but white flight caused that area to turn into a slum. Residents of Summerhill were disgruntled. To the north and the east of the Washington Rawson neighborhood was enclosed by interstates, and the Georgia Avenue shored up the southern border in the east by the line ran parallel to the midway between Capitol Avenue and Fraser Street. So this development of all these highways and all these roads displaced over 965 Black families. According to Jordan Peeler, who was one of the residents at Summerhill, they demanded city services such as street cleaning, health, and educational facilities, as well as adequate housing and job creation and training programs from Allen. Allen, the mayor, attempted to alleviate tensions between poor Black residents and City Hall by going to the Black city's kingmakers, who received perks from white political and civic establishments unshared by the Black masses. But it was to no avail. The Summerhill Rebellion of 1966 marred Atlanta's image as the city too busy to hate. And as you can see, there's another motto slogan that's attributed to Atlanta. So similar to the New South, similar to Black Mecca, these are just ideas. These are just marketing ploys to bring more people into the city so you can buy into the idea of Atlanta being some Black paradise, when all actuality, the truth is a lot worse.
On September 1966, days shy of the 60th, the 60th year, the 60-year memorial of Atlanta race riots, unrest erupted in the Summerhill community, when Detective R.H. Kerr of the Atlanta Police Auto Theft Squad shot Harold Prather 3 times in the side, lower back, and hip as he resisted arrest. At a stoplight on the corner of Capitol and what is that? Ormerod? Am I
Yeah,
saying that right?
yeah.
Ormerod? Okay, cool. Prather attempted to evade police who had a warrant against him, shooting roused Summerhill residents, and within minutes, several hundred angry citizens thronged over the wounded Prather.
So
Thronged over,
yes.
yeah.
So yeah, so and as you can see, to alleviate the situation, they bring in the black preachers, the black politicians.
So we're getting shot. We're getting shot dead
Mhm.
in the streets because of whatever the situation is. Most likely, we're doing some shit because we're poor and we need to do this shit because there's no other opportunities. And there's a big uproar about it in order to smooth things over. Hey, where's the Negro leaders at?
Exactly. Where's those Negro leaders at? And then as time goes by, you start to see more clashes between black youth and black authority. There was one issue that happened in 1967 on June 17th, where a black security guard at a Flamingo Grill in the shopping center in Atlanta, basically harassed this black youth. And concerned citizens of the town called a town hall meeting at the shopping center to discuss the issues. Unfortunately, concerned residents, as they rally, they get ignored. More shootings, more black youth being killed going into June 19th, 1967. Again, they get several black leaders, including the alderman, state senator, who come in to tell the people to draft a petition to list their grievances. Mind you, black people are being shot in the streets. So, but they want them to list their grievances in the form of a petition. So you have
So,
Stokely Carmichael, who
no,
later.
real quick. Let me break this down for the real niggas. Hey, you niggas are getting shot in the street by police or whatever, whoever. You're getting shot in the streets, and you're upset about it. You don't want to be killed in the streets. Well, hey, you know the solution? Write a letter.
Write a letter. If that's not the most dismissive
Not
and most insulting thing you can tell people.
write a letter. Not and I always hate when people say, reach out to your congressman or reach out to your what is it
Your
alderman or
governor, yeah.
no on the very lower level. Reach out to your alderman or reach out.
Oh
There
yeah,
are black people dying in the street, and you telling me to reach out to my alderman? I couldn't tell you who that motherfucker's name is right now. And I got a list of politicians and rank
Laugh because
in Indianapolis.
most people can say the same. They would be like, I don't know.
yeah,
Bro,
yeah.
but I got a list of them.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you who the motherfucking alderman is for. But they'll tell you to reach out to that motherfucker. Chain of command type shit. Man.
And mind you, this is 67. So like during this time, like we are still in the midst of the civil rights movement. People all over, black people collectively are fed the fuck up and have been continuously working and fighting and striving to make movement and to be seen as people worthy of and not asking, demanding, fighting, striving for, to not only be seen as complete humans in our full humanity, but to be given equal treatment.
Bro, to be seen as citizens.
And of course, we saw during then, now, and everywhere in between, the response to these requests. Like, I mean, even at the mall, like people were coming together in City Hall and saying, like, we need places for the youth to be able to play. We need playgrounds. We need centers. We need normal things that will keep our kids off the street. And the response were, shut the fuck up, write a letter.
Exactly.
Or I'll arrest you. I
mean, and all this is happening through the late 60s. And then we didn't even get into the murder of MLK, which happened in 68. And again, we'll see Atlanta's leadership fall upon black leadership. in a carefully stage managed and immediate aftermath of King's assassination, where he got the police chief and had a bunch of police surround the King family and home and just send out a message to everybody like, oh, we're protecting everybody. Oh, we're a part of you, or we seem to care about you. City officials recognized immediately that the world, the nation, Black America, Atlanta lost a great leader. And every official and every police officer in the city was on standby that day.
I bet.
875 officers, 250 firefighters, and there wasn't a riot during this time. Now, the political leadership like to push this idea as, oh, that was just an amazing PR win for us.
As
No,
in
there's
Black
no
people were
rioting.
devastated and drained and
Exactly.
exhausted. Like,
That more so was the truth. There probably wasn't a riot because Black people were emotionally drained by this time.
and shocked.
Shocked.
Parents have talked to me about how they, everybody goes like, there are specific moments in time that like you 100% remember where you were and how you felt. Like my grandfather explicitly can tell you where he was, what he was doing, and the way that his body felt hearing that MLK was killed and murdered. Mm-hmm. Like it is a memory, it's a core memory that will never leave him. Even as now, as he's starting to show signs of Alzheimer's, if I called him on the phone, I'm pretty sure that that memory would come to mind immediately. That and the day that my mother was born. Mm-hmm. We know that it was a very small percentage of Black folks that participated in the civil rights movement for whatever reason. Many people were afraid. Many people were scared. People had things that they weren't willing to potentially lose or be hurt. Kids, for whatever reason, didn't believe in it. Black bourgeoisie who would rather just, continue to go to tea parties and golf with their white friends. And granted, this is not to say that every Black person with money didn't show up, because there were plenty of Black people with money who were real ones and put their money where their mouth was and utilize it to help fund the movement. Mm-hmm. But we didn't see this with the masses. And I think this is what led to this changing of the guard, because after the assassination of MLK, you see this like emergence of these Black bourgeoisie people who coming out the woodworks, even as there are still plenty of Black leaders and radicals at this time and organizers still fighting, saying like, see what happens when y'all don't fall in line. If y'all niggas just go to college and y'all niggas just get a good job and y'all niggas do X, Y, and Z, this can be you. Yeah. So you don't end up like that. And it creates, and instead of actually, in some capacities, where we saw more people being radicalized, we saw more people being like, this is unacceptable. We see more people condemning. We also see a lot of other people being like, maybe I need to also just fall in line.
Yeah. Because we have such a large figure like Martin Luther King who gets killed, it creates a vacuum. And then there's going to be sometimes the people who fill that vacuum, don't have your best intentions at heart. And you see that with Atlanta's Black leadership. I mean, even with the rise of Maynard Jackson, who when he started off seemed to have good intentions. I mean, he ran for Senate against a person named Herman Talmadge, who was actually a starch segregationist. And actually, it's crazy, he had the support of a lot of Atlanta's Black leadership, but he was such a segregationist, he had a pamphlet called You and Segregation. He published this himself. He argues that desegregation and democracy were communist plots. He also says that the use of power to ban segregation was unconstitutional, and the United States is not as a republic, not a democracy. And he had the Black bourgeoisie, the Black leadership class in Atlanta in his pocket. He would give them perks. So it just kind of puts everything in perspective. Okay, so this is the guy that you're going to support. Just the white guy that you're going to support, really. And at the beginning,
what was his name again for the listeners? What was the name?
Herman Talmadge.
Okay.
Her man. Not my man. Her man.
So, okay, so Maynard Jackson, he rises to power. Obviously, he runs into roadblocks because the black leadership class, you have to get in goods with them. You have to get good with them. You have to give them perks.
Gotta kiss some ass.
Kiss some ass in order to climb up the ladder. He didn't do
Some
that,
black
so
ass.
he didn't win at first, the Senate. But then as time goes by, he starts to work his way in. He becomes vice mayor, and he models himself as a man of the people, because there is actually a sanitation strike that he was also in favor on the side of the strikers during the sanitation strike. He says things like, the wages that are paid to sanitation workers, who are majority black, most of the majority of the city's workers of Atlanta are majority black. He said the wages that are paid to them are disgrace before God, and insisted that the mayor negotiate. The mayor this time, his name is Sam Massell. So after some back and forth between the sanitation workers and a lot of the city hall and the mayor, he finally buckles and gives them the wage hikes that they need so they can survive, so they can actually get paid. And Jackson models himself as the people's champion. And as you see, as time goes by, he starts to sing a different tune. So a couple factors to keep in mind when we're talking about the black leadership class and how they rose to prominence. During the legislation of the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, along with white flight, it's opened up an opportunity for black professionals, academics, and businessmen to come to the South, specifically in Atlanta, and stake their claim on a lot of the property there. So, and Maynard Jackson took notice of this. So you see the changing demographics. The city's reputation for Black Mecca brought in, or made it seem like there was opportunity for young, ambitious, educated Black workers to come in and fill those voids. And you start to see the population of Atlanta change. So Atlanta's population grew from 38%. Atlanta's Black population grew from 38% in 1960 to 45% in 1968, 54% in 1973. And Maynard Jackson declared Atlanta the best city in America for Black people to live, because he was fully aware of the voting strength that city had. It increased to 48% and it was still rising. So all this information at his fingertips, he starts to understand the voting base and how he could gain power, and also to move out the old guard of the Black elite to make way for a new guard of the Black elite.
The new capitalist guard of the Black elite.
Exactly. So we start to see Maynard Jackson do a 180.
Which is so sad, because for a minute, you really get your hopes up, and Black people had their hopes up, and they were like, this person is supporting labor strike. This person is really out here understanding that we need something else. And instead, the math was mathing in his head, and he said, actually, no.
No, he does a complete 180.
This does not benefit me.
Exactly. He's like,
Like on April 4th, he has the audacity to then like meet with the press and wants to misquote like mad niggas love to do. And on the second day of the strike, he literally goes out and he's like, the strikers will be permanently replaced if you don't go back to work in 48 hours. The audacity. You got the support of all these people by calling out the injustices that these folks were going through. You understood the premise of the sanitation strike. You made it seem like you were all for it. And then on day 2 of the strike, you're like, first of all, let me misquote him to get y'all niggas be a little excited. And then follow up with, but if y'all niggas don't get back to work in 48 hours, you're not about to have a job. And then follow through on the threat. He said that we about to get some replacement workers up in here. Y'all niggas want to get rowdy. You are expendable. And then, of course, you know who was like, we fuck with this kind of little Negro. You my kind of guy. We like you. White people had hella support from white leaders, white businesses. The Atlanta Business League was calling him. He was going to tea time with these folks. He was just a good old boy. If you know your history, you know that that big MLK senior already wasn't the nicest flower in the field. But on
Nigga,
the
no.
anniversary, the fucking gall.
I did not know about that shit.
On the anniversary of his son's death, literally defended this man. Like he said, like they say that that King Senior, he's like, he tried his best and he didn't do it. And he goes on record and says, like, if you do everything you can and don't get satisfaction, then fire the hell out of them. And Jackson did just that. Granted, if you know your history, you know that MLK Senior was a very different man than his son. And a lot of that is what actually causes MLK Jr. at the time before his death to become more radicalized. And I think that's why we see this growth with him, is that in the beginning he understood things were wrong and he wanted to advocate for people, but we see towards the end of his life, like his thought process was really about not just all people, but it was about the I'm not gonna say the bottom of our people because that's inaccurate and I feel like that's disrespectful, but it was really about the working class. And that's when we see Dr. King's language shift and we see the real reasons why folks are really not trying to fuck with him at the end. Was it wasn't about just voting rights and, you know, marching and the picturesque versions of MLK we were fed. We see that once he really starts speaking up for the people, then white people really are like, oh, we don't fuck with you no more. And so we've talked about this offline of how we think that a lot of the things that folks criticized MLK for in the beginning and that we hear from others throughout history came from inside the house. Like, look who raised this man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just no, because it's really disheartening to hear, but it allowed, when I first saw this and started to learn a little bit more, it was like, this makes so much sense.
No, and when I first learned
came back up when we were getting ready for the episode, I was just like, oh shit, like, you know, there's certain little tidbits you forget and then it come back and you're like,
no, when I first learned about MLK's dad, I was like, what the fuck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had to look it up and I was like, am I tripping? Like, all right, maybe I got some bad information. And then I started looking into it and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. And this is one of the things where, you know, he tries to say that, well, I get that y'all need and deserve a pay raise, but the city don't got the money. We don't have it.
Yes. Maynard Jackson admitted that y'all need a pay raise, but then he said, we still have it right now.
Audacity. And this actually like really shook people. Like this wasn't one of those notions where you knew this man was a snake always. Like this was really a wolf in sheep's clothing, and Black folks were really stunned. But I also think that a lot of this like awoke the Black working class because they were fed up with Black leadership in the middle class, and the way that Jackson really just betrayed everybody. And then saw how like the NAACP, the Urban League has supported him. And even the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, had encouraged people to go back to work. And that's crazy. That's crazy.
And and you see Daddy King come up again saying, if any group comes to destroy our town, we are against it with all the power we have. Like our town, okay. Obviously, he's leaving some people out of our town. You hear he's talking to a specific group of people that's not the Black poor and working class. We're getting to the portion me reading this in preparation for this episode was one of the most heartbreaking parts of this book, The Legend of the Black Mecca, the Atlanta child murders. So we're going to start this off. During 1974, Jackson's inauguration, things are looking hopeful. You see, he held his inauguration in the Civic Center, and more than 44,000 Black people showed up. This was to see how the South's first big city Black mayor would change their lives. Everybody's all jubilant and celebrating. But then you also see there's 500. By the end of the decade, the city would claim 7 Fortune 500 manufacturing companies. You got Coca-Cola. You even have some service firms, Cox Communications, First Atlanta, First Company of Georgia, Delta Airlines, so on and so forth. And this brings in economic growth to Atlanta. The majority of Black Atlantans, however, remained in abject poverty. Crime continued to blight the city. And you start to see the business community start to fear that commerce would leave the community or leave the city. However, during Jackson's second term, you start to see this becomes the darkest chapter in the city's history. The horrendous crimes were committed against Black Atlanta's most vulnerable of the population, the Black youth. Atlanta child murders amounted to some of the most horrific crimes committed against Black children in American history. You start to see that the Atlanta child murders demonstrate how Black popular political sentiments toward Jackson start to shift. He went from championing the poor and working class to protecting Atlanta's national and international commercial branding, the Black Mecca. You start to see the mass murder of Black victims, including 30 between the ages of 4 and 28, all of whom were the city's Black poor and working class, and from families embodying various levels of economic poverty and familial instability. The police had no leads in the cases. There was fear. Bodies would turn up. Black children would be snatched. More kidnappings and killings will follow between October of 1980 and May of 1981. 16 additional Black males were reported missing. Their bodies turned up in various places in the metropolitan Atlanta.
And what do? All of this is taking place, and instead of actually doing their fucking jobs and trying to figure out why this is happening, who's behind this, in order to save fucking face, they go to the damn media, and what do our politicians say? They're like, oh, they're probably just hustlers and runaways and those bad kids, and try to make it seem as if these children are deserving of the fate that came to them.
Exactly.
And it just lets you know just how the folks in power, and some of these were Black elites as well, felt. But this is the Black Mecca, right? This is a perfect utopian Black space where all Black people have access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is one of the most horrendous things that took place. And instead of rallying together and actually supporting, they once again were saving face and trying to paint this off. And so, do you know what actually happens? Black people, working class Black people, come together. Black women, speaking of folks in affairs like Camille Bell, a former civil rights worker, and she was a mother of Yusef Bell, who was one of the victims, came together with 6 other victims. And if this doesn't sound real familiar to you, thinking back to a couple of years, I don't know what will. They came together and created the Stop Committee, or the Committee to Stop Children's Murder. And, almost just as much as they were working to make sure that folks didn't just push this to the side, and actually were working to find out who the murderer was and what was happening to their children, they also wanted to make sure that people knew who their kids were, that they said their names, that they talked about them, that they knew what they were into, that these were children, that they had families, they had friends, they had people, they had teachers who loved them and cared about them, and they had futures that they should have been able to live. And it also was an attempt to like really work hard to say that like, yes, we know that the city is failing y'all, but like we are not. Like they were aiming to constantly just challenge and the negligence of the city. They created pamphlets for child safety. They gave them out in neighborhoods. They went door to door. They gave them out in shopping malls, in grocery store. And it was really, they also came together and had a rally.
Yeah.
In Washington at the Lincoln Memorial in 1981 to really focus not just on the children in Atlanta, but the children nationwide. And this is once again, like, this isn't the rich. This isn't the Black bourgeoisie. This isn't your people in power who should be doing something. This is once again Black community members, and a few of them who did have access coming together to say that like this is not okay, and showing that we don't all get saved until, I mean, one of us don't get saved until we all get saved. We're not all free by just making sure that Atlanta is good, and came together and said, we need to focus on what's happening nationwide and organizing to understand if this was a problem in other places. If so, like here's what we're trying to do in this community. You tell us your strategy so that this could come to a stop.
Yeah.
And this is how we get the Bat Patrol.
Mm-hmm.
Who also came together with baseball bats and guns and would actually patrol neighborhoods to protect their communities from this killer. Like, yep. Black people were not just sitting at home afraid and confused because they knew that they couldn't turn to the police. They knew that unfortunately the Black leadership in Atlanta were ignoring them. And so they came together to do something.
And that's crazy because as much as the media will portray that Black people don't care about their own neighborhoods, they don't care about the people in their neighborhoods, and for them to put that kind of energy into bettering the situation and trying to, figure out what's going on with, there's missing children here.
Exactly.
And you're ready to write them off as thugs and convicts, but they are children.
Exactly.
And you know what else? They were also fed the fuck up with Maynard. They said this man is nothing, to the point where even his ex-wife,
God.
This nigga is full of shit. He's not, and actively went to go support Stop, and was like, she had 4 kids, his trifling ass kids, but she still had 4 kids. And she said something needs to happen. And y'all may not be doing anything, but I want people to know that as another mother, as another person, that I'm willing to put my little bit of power on the line, my access on the line, because this is what's important. And that is what we need. Not this fake shit where we have people just pretending to care, getting access to seats in power, having money, having businesses, perpetuating this notion of a prosperous nation, the same way we see today in Atlanta. You need people who are willing, when shit gets real, to be like, this shit can go tomorrow, but I'm going to make sure that I'm 10 toes down for what's important.
Mm-hmm. And what's also crazy is a lot of those mothers in Stop, specifically Camille Bell, they were so good at investigating and gathering information that she even predicted, based on patterns of the murders, when another murder would happen of a child. And it happened, and she predicted it to the week, and it happened that week that she predicted. They were doing better police work than the actual police of Atlanta.
And they thought that was a fucking problem.
So I mean, bro, are we surprised by that? I mean,
no.
Police work in general is, hey, what can we do to limit the crime against, actual taxpayers or our actual base or whatever it is that we're, dealing with.
It kind of goes back to one of our older episodes when he talks about violence with Rasul, or the continuum of violence. Violence is allowed to happen in certain spaces, in certain areas. This was one of those areas where they did not care. Violence was allowed to happen. There's some poor black people, some poor niggas. Who cares?
And the only time it did matter was when there was assets or something for us to seize.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares about riots when they're in black neighborhoods, but the moment you really fuck up, a post office, a mall, now it's a problem.
Yeah.
Amen.
And so, of course, we know the police was not fucking with this. So we talked about the Bat Patrol for a quick second, which was a group of community members who came together and they was patrolling with their bats, with their guns, and would really be working to make sure that people could get home. They were making sure kids got home safely, was walking kids home. They were on shifts, patrolling neighborhoods at night. And of course, the police were like, you can't do our job better than and y'all know a little bitch was Jackson and was trying
I'm
to tell
sorry. I'm sorry, Cam, do that again.
little bitch Jackson.
Exactly.
Was like
That's
that's what sound like in my head. He basically told them that the job of patrolling was for the police force, and that if y'all don't do what the fuck we want and go back inside your houses, yada yada yada, because they need people to think that the police do what? Protect and serve. Do they? No. And so they said, no, fuck you. We gave you a chance. You didn't do it well. And so we didn't stop. So then the deputy police chief at the time, another old ass man named Eldrin Bell, told them that if you get caught carrying a weapon, concealed or otherwise, you're going to get arrested. And so because they had to show their ass in a show of force, they really was like, rather than actually allow us to come together and let the police try to do their jobs, and y'all can do what you're doing and create a plan of action to where community members would feel safe, they wanted to just squash this and prove to them that like making sure that images were more important than citizens. They did end up catching the serial killer. They did catch him, but it wasn't necessarily because of their own work. Like community members had done enough to track down, to mark patterns, to be able to figure this out, to the point where they really took the crumbs, got to run with them and get the credit. And politicians thought that this would give Black people their little happy joy, and that we would just have some resurgence of faith in them. But we were still like, fuck the police. Actually, y'all, like this, it didn't help the the PR stunt that they thought that they did, even though they were tipped off by plenty of Black people about who might be behind this, what was happening, how to find and to do your fucking job to arrest them. It's not enough, because we really need to make sure, and it's once again goes to show that the Black bourgeoisie will not save you, the police will not save you, these
and you know what,
getting money won't you. It is your community who will save you time and time again.
And you know what, I would almost give the police some kind of credit if they would acknowledge that. I said I would give them some kind of credit if they would acknowledge, hey, look, this was the community coming together. This was the Black community coming together, acknowledging this they were working together, and they assisted us with catching this criminal.
Yeah.
But they didn't even do that much.
Nope. Unfortunately,
they didn't even do that much.
Yeah, unfortunately, they answered back with militarized police units called the Red Dog Unit.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know the Red Dog Unit, it is an aggressive police force that was stationed in Black neighborhoods to curtail the high sales of drugs and violent crimes within those neighborhoods. So in 7 months, the Red Dog Unit was responsible for over 721 felony arrests. This established the Red Dog Unit as, it's partly based in citizen complaints and media exposure, suggesting that City Hall was not working to quell the flood of drugs in the city and to combat crime.
This is the 80s. Crack is going wild.
Exactly.
It's a problem.
Exactly.
And so what does the city respond? The same way we see all over the country. They respond with police. They respond with violent police at that.
Yep.
busting down doors, breaking up homes, scooping up people, whether you were guilty or not, using this as a mechanism to plant things on people. You see pieces of this, whether you've read it in books, you have family members, you have watched a movie. This wasn't just something that took place in LA. It wasn't just something that took place in New York. This was happening in every major Black city in the Red Dog unit.
Basically, you're guilty until proven innocent, and hey, whatever evidence we may find or plant on you, you don't have enough money to fight that.
I mean, even the term Red Dog comes from football. It's basically a an attack all at once, and even some bitch ass former officer who refused to go on record by name because he's a scary bitch was basically saying that, like, we used to say that Red Dog stood for running every drug dealer out of Georgia, and basically would like go into detail about the standards of how what they would do when they were in white neighborhood or when they were in areas where there were tourists and city dwellers in order to keep them safe, and how they didn't give a fuck and they had free reign to do whatever they wanted in Black neighborhoods.
Yeah, whatever they wanted. Exactly.
He said our orders were to arrest them. We were told to round these niggas up every night.
Exactly.
He said, y'all could be drunk coming off a Braves game. Y'all can get in a brawl at a bar. Y'all can do what you want. But a Black man walking down the street, let's search you real quick. I think you have something on you. I probably have something in my pocket that I'm now going to say is in your pocket with no real causation. And now I'm going to lock you up. And people were not okay with this.
And I mean, and police brutality rose because of the Red Dog unit. Again, like I said, as a military style police model, they merged to assert a military police state where it arrested, maimed, and killed Black Atlantans at a higher rate than any other demographic. And it's kind of interesting that today we have Cop City. This is kind of before Cop City, but now we have this military training ground for Black police officers where they're learning how to defuse bombs, they're learning how to do raids, and they're being trained by Israeli military forces. It's kind of interesting how that connection happens.
They're also training against protest.
And that's the biggest point. Like the main point.
Like the main point of Cop City came out of the 2020 protest for George Floyd, and honestly, I believe they were thinking about this well beyond George Floyd. When we talk about Trayvon Martin back in what was it, 2016? 2014?
I think so. Let me check on that for you.
So, like,
I'm pretty sure it is.
Whether we say Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, any protests that were happening in major cities, the government in Atlanta were watching these protests just like every other government in the United States, and wondering how we can counter those protests to keep them in line, because Atlanta always has and always will. The government is going to tell them, hey, we're the government of MLK. We love when you protest the right way. What is the right way? They're never going to define that shit, of course. The right way to protest is stay at your crib and shut the fuck up. But
and then on top of that, of course, like the money is always involved in this, and Atlanta wants some money, they're gonna go after it and get it. It doesn't matter who gets harmed, like the fucking Olympics. Like freaking they were doing the absolute most to even get the Olympics committee to consider Atlanta for the 96 Olympics. Like they were hosting tea parties.
They
were literally hosting dinners and parties at basically plantations and had butlers and maids and people playing antebellum music and giving them a good old American time. We're flying to Japan literally for the general session to bid at the Centennial game and talking about like how Atlanta is the home of the most diverse community and some of the most intelligent African Americans. And look at our schools and look at our things. And you know that Maynard Jackson was basically sucking them off to get them to come. And on top of that, used his fucking head dog.
Hey, hold on. Pause right there. Pause, nigga. Pause.
He was, but we like
no, because he said
like he didn't have this fucking energy when not even just
sucking them off to make them come. Pause.
Unintended.
Unintended.
But it's like when you had working class and poor Blacks advocating for something as normal as better wages, you were like, shut the fuck up and get to work. When you had even poor whites trying to advocate for better standards of living, you didn't give a damn. You weren't going this hard, but you willing to rub noses and do God knows what else. This is giving Fire Fest. I would have done anything for the water. Tax dollars to make presentations, invoking Martin Luther King Jr. like he would not have been rolling over in his grave to have the Olympics here, proclaiming this to be this centric, peaceful place. And you know, if y'all know y'all history, you know they won the bid, and what occurred was a fucking shit show. Like literally 14 months leading up to the Atlanta games were horrific. Like the most vulnerable citizens were just thrown to the wind. 9,000 homeless people were arrested and detained in the city, literally without probable cause. And then were slapped with orders to cease and desist and to shut up. There were human rights issues that were taking place nonstop. Like Atlanta had literally gone through an urban renewal. If you've ever watched any documentary about what happens when the Olympics comes anywhere, you know that it is horrific. Like, bro,
they displaced a bunch of poor African American people, white people too. They displaced a bunch of, like, if we're talking, we'll just class people. They displaced a bunch of poor people to bring in the Olympics, to make the Olympics look like this is the spot where you want to be at. And then during the Olympics, they arrested and moved around a bunch of poor people into some of the poor people that I've heard were moved around during the Olympics. It was basically moving them from east to west, like type of shit. They didn't know what was going on. If they weren't in jail cells, they were being shipped to other ends of Atlanta. Like, it was terrible.
Over 30,000 low income or residents were displaced. Like, developers,
it was terrible.
Deals left and right. They were told to just get rid of them. They needed the market to go up. They needed the city to be cleaned up and to be made pretty. And you know how they did this? They used the police in order to do it. They used the police to do it.
Yeah.
They
this is y'all Black Mecca.
A couple dollars thrown at people, and thankfully, you know, people were willing to stand up in some capacities, but not enough. Like, landlords would just decline to renew your lease. They was negotiating contracts on the back end. They were raising rents so that way everything would go well. Like, in the book, it says that Atlanta went out of its way to block Olympic visitors from local vendors and small entrepreneurs in Atlanta's Black community. Like, so even when niggas came to town for the Olympics, they didn't want them going nowhere near Black people. They had people brought in. They had white businesses coming in. They had the bourgeoisie placed around the Olympic town.
Oh, so let me get this straight. So, because we had a conversation before this episode, where we're talking about, you know, Black elite and as far as how it is for especially black business owners, because black business owners believe that, hey, wherever I can get the money is where I need to be at. And from what you just said, they were blocking people from even going to black businesses because of the shit that went down. But
Yeah.
this is what we call our Mecca.
They created a plan literally created a displacement plan to get all of this together. Like, if you were late on your rent, you were the first to go. And then if you were families, but you had people who weren't on your lease, you had to go. And a lot of this is what we see in Section 8 policies today, you know, or we see in applications for welfare. You can't have two adults in a household. You can't be married in order to qualify for assistance. You can't do a lot of things as a way to perpetuate a class issue. But what we saw,
I've seen in some situations, bro, weeks after the child that turned 18, hey, that's a whole adult in your house.
Ooh, yeah.
It said that in the book, it's talked about how Atlanta's 20,000 displaced and homeless people. And so 20,000. This is not, we're not talking Skid Row, where there are maybe estimates of 3,000 people, which is still problematic and horrific. People living throughout LA and in that area that are displaced.
I'm gonna say, this is Skid Row, like an avenue, like that's
it's multiple blocks.
It's a legit neighborhood to say.
People that are homeless. This is 20,000 people. You don't have 20,000 homeless people without without use of force and displacement. And those folks, those mostly Black, brown, and poor white folks, when the Olympics were there, guess where they spent their time?
In jail.
In jail.
In jail.
Like putting literal vagrancy-free zones, like city ordinances. There was a strategic method in which that Black folks in power, a Black mayor, these things happened under a Black mayor, with backing from Black people in power with money. This is also to say that we already know that there were plenty of white dollars being thrown this way. That's not our issue. We've been knew that there were white people in Atlanta. We've been knew that white people never had our interest at heart. The problem is, when we praise Atlanta as this perfect place, this Mecca, which y'all know how I feel at this point of just the sacrilegious nature of even using that, but like this picture of this perfect utopia for Black people, it's imperative to understand that it has never been perfect for the working class people. It has only been perfect for those in the upper echelons of society. And even for them, I don't think it's perfect either, because I mean, I guess once you sell your soul, you just you don't miss it anymore because it's not there. But
yeah, there's no feeling. There's no emotion.
No, because I could imagine
knowing what I did to my own people,
like, bro, I could imagine being one of those. I could imagine being one of those 20,000 people, because, like, especially during the time of the Olympics, I'm not making the money that I'm making now, of course, but I could have easily what 20. What was the year of the Olympics? 20.
The year of the Olympics in Atlanta was 1996.
Oh God, I'm saying 20. I'm not 1996. Oh dear God, my family would have been homeless. I was like what, 6 or 7. My mother would have been homeless. My dad probably would have been in jail because he couldn't take care of us, and we would be in foster care, if not on the streets.
It's what's sad.
All for the fucking Olympics.
What's sad though is, as what we saw was like the city of Atlanta collectively, with the white bourgeoisie, the white middle class, the Black bourgeoisie at that, collectively decided that we need to put on the facade of a perfect place, to the point where we are willing to displace and arrest. And think about it, if there were roughly 20,000 people that they detained during the Olympic Games, Imagine the people who didn't end up locked up, who ended up having to move somewhere else if they were blessed enough to have family who would take them in or leave, or who were still homeless during this time and just weren't seen. And then when this is over, the people that were released back into the wild, or the people who remained in prison for no other reason than being poor, like the impact of that. And granted, we're going to dive more into how like this leads into what we now have as fucking Cop City. But Atlanta has never been a Black Mecca. There has never been anything in Atlanta that benefited the whole of Black people. One, because it could never. Like,
Right.
Black people live everywhere. Black people don't all want to live in Atlanta. If anybody, even just on a geography level, Atlanta's only this big, you know?
Yeah.
And we're talking about like the city of Atlanta, even though like a lot of Black people have been pushed into this narrative, like, hey, earn more, get more. And what do they do with that money? They move out into the suburbs of Atlanta.
Yeah.
So Atlanta being the Mecca of Black people, that's just it's not it. It's just not it. And then we'll get into, of course, we're going to get into the whole Cop City debate and how that relates to everything we've been talking about today. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to be said about this Cop City thing, especially when during the research we were talking about where they're trying to build that whole facility is in a neighborhood or in an area where even the people that lived there didn't even have a say on it.
Not one word was given
because
they didn't get a chance because
they're not
they're
not considered Atlanta. What did I'm already to say? That's not Atlanta.
Atlanta.
It's not Atlanta.
Not Atlanta.
It's not Atlanta. Decatur. I mean, I think to kind
and
of
then we'll. I'm sorry.
Together, it's really important to recognize a few things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Black people exist everywhere.
Yes.
And one, there will never be, in this lifetime, at least, you know, maybe later on, but I don't personally believe in perfection or utopia, but there will never be a utopia for Black people.
No.
The goal is that we will get free and that we will have an agency to live lives that are fulfilling, that all of us, that we will destroy the class structures. There will not be a rich and a poor, that there will not be the haves and the have-nots, that we will be able to exist in a capacity where everyone's humanity is recognized. And when we do the things that place a city or specific groups of people, or we create toxic language that only uplifts those that are privileged, even the three of us who have been blessed with degrees and access in the world, like then we do a disservice to the rest of Black people whose shoulders we stand upon and whose hands we hold and stand with, right? And I think that it's important to not sit here and praise a city for all of the things that have gone well. Like the three of us would not sit here, and Black if he was here, and say that like nothing good has ever come out of Atlanta, because we would be lying, and then we would just be haters. And that's not who we are as a people. But we've said time and time again that it is imperative for us to recognize the wolf that is in sheep's clothing. And Atlanta is a fucking wolf in sheep's clothing. And right now it's not even hiding anymore. Now it's just showing that it's a wolf.
Yep.
That people drank the Kool-Aid for long enough and thought that, you know, because you could go out there with money and your Gucci belt and your bags, and you can get your little degrees, and you could open you a business or two, and you got some money, that you're really out here doing it for yourself. But at the end of the day, that's not the bottom line that they're aiming to go at.
Yeah, all in all, you know, what can I say? My co-host has already said, just because they're a Black face in a high place doesn't mean that it's going to turn to any material gains for the Black people of that city, especially if you're part of the Black poor and working class. Everybody tune in for our second part of this episode. We're going to talk about Cop City. Hopefully, Two Black will be with us. Hopefully, we'll be able to interview Kamal, who was down on the ground in Atlanta protesting against Cop City. Any closing thoughts from anybody?
I already said mine.
Yeah, I said yours. But yeah, so just check us out. And peace. And
This has been the Black Mist Podcast. We are out.
We're out. Peace.
Okay, fresh out the plane in a whole nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the